Hello, Bobcats. Mrs. Wilhite, still in Chapter 8. We're moving into Lesson 6. We're going to be comparing fractions today. It is a 5th grade standard, something we have to learn in 5th grade. I'm hoping at the end of the lesson you'll be able to compare fractions by using the least common denominator. So again, we're going to compare fractions using the least common denominator. Why, Mrs. Wilhite? What's the main idea? What is the purpose? Well, you already know it is a 5th grade standard, something we have to learn in 5th grade. But it also helps you figure out the value of fractions. You know, when you think about money, 25 cents can be a quarter, 2 dimes and a nickel. It could be 25 pennies. None of those three look anything like each other, but they have the same value. Today we're going to be looking at fractions that look nothing alike, but we're going to be able to compare the values. Is it the same? Are they equivalent? Is one greater? Is one less than the other? So again, today we're going to be comparing fractions using the least common denominator. All right, well, what do you already know about comparing? I know you've seen these symbols before. Less than. And then, of course, the next one would be greater than. And one way to think about it, or one way to remember which one's which, is to think about it as an open mouth. Okay? If the open mouth is facing the larger number, that might help you remember. Like it's a little Pac-Man. And of course, the last symbol is equal or equivalent to. So from my experience, I know that we use these symbols to show the value of less than, greater than, and equal to. And that's going to help us today. All right, how do we approach the problems today? Well, step 1, you need to list the multiples of the denominators. Okay, remember multiples is when you are able to count by that number. So 10, 20, 30, 40, 2, 4, 6, 8. We're going to list the multiples of that number on the bottom of the fraction, the denominator. Next, we're going to use that multiple that we found, the lowest one, to make an equivalent fraction. Once we have equivalent fractions or fractions that are equal, then we can move into step 3 and actually compare which one's greater than, which one's less than, are they equal? And finally, we'll look at our answer and we'll think, is it reasonable? Does it make sense? Is this fraction really smaller or bigger in value? So again, list the multiples of that denominator, that number on the bottom. Okay, once you find the least common multiple, then you can make an equivalent fraction. Compare your fractions. See which one's larger, smaller, or are they equal? And finally, is it reasonable? All right, example 1. Trevor made 2 out of 3 goals and Tyler made 5 out of 6. Who made a greater fraction of goals? Well, step 1, list those multiples of the denominators. Well, the denominators, the numbers on the bottom, are 3 and 6. So let's try to find the lowest common multiple. 3, 6, 9, 12. 6, 12. Well, I can go ahead and stop. I can see that the lowest one they share is 6. Step 1, find the lowest common multiple. Done. Step 2, create those equivalent fractions. We're going to use 6 as our new denominator. We want our fractions to have the same denominator. It's easier to compare if they have the same denominator. Well, 3 times 2 is 6. And what I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. What's 2 times 2? That's 4. 6 times 1 is 6. And 5 times 1 is 5. Step 1, find the lowest common multiple. That was 6. Step 2, create equivalent fractions. Well, we have. Step 3, we can now compare. Is 4 pieces out of 6 bigger than 5 pieces out of 6? No, of course it's not. So we can say that 5/6 is larger or greater than 4/6. Is it reasonable? Well, yeah, if there's a cake and I ate 5 pieces out of 6, I ate more than if I only had 4 out of the 6 pieces. I can go ahead and move on. All right, example number 2. Compare 3/5 and 1/2 using the least common denominator. Step 1, list those multiples. Well, then we have to use the numbers on the bottom, the denominators, and the multiples of 5 are first. 5, 10, 15, 20. What are the multiples of 2? I'm looking for the smallest one they share. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. I can stop. I have found the lowest common multiple. Step 1 is done. Step 2, create equivalent fractions. Well, I already know that the new denominator is 10 from step 1. That's the lowest common multiple. Well, 5 times 2 is 10. I have to use that same number on top. What's 3 times 2? So I have 6/10 is equivalent to 3/5. 2 times 5 is 10. 1 times 5 is 5. I have created an equivalent fraction. 5/10 is the same value as 1/2, right? Isn't 5 half of 10? Isn't 1 half of 2? So I have equivalent fractions. Step 1, find the lowest common denominator. We got it. It was 10. That was the multiple they shared. 2, we created new fractions. So now we can go ahead and do step 3, compare. Well, if there's 10 pieces on the table and I had 5 of them, is that bigger, less than having 6 pieces? Well, clearly 6 out of 10 is greater than 5/10, since 4 is less than 5. So if we look here, 4, we can say 5/10 is less than 6/10. So that must mean that 3/5 is going to be greater than 1/2. So again, once we have that multiple, create the fraction so they have the same denominator. And then once they have the same denominator, then we can go ahead and compare. And I'm going to say that 3/5 is greater than 1/2. It's reasonable. Moving into guided practice, let's write those multiples of the 5 and the 3, the numbers on the bottom. 5, 10, 15, 20. I'm looking for the lowest one they share. 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. I can stop. The denominator that they'll share in the new fractions will be 15. That's the lowest common multiple. So now I can go ahead and do step 2, which is make equivalent fractions. 15 is my new denominator. So how do I make 5 turn into 15? 5 times 3 is 15. I have to do the same to the top. 1 times 3 is 3. The other fraction is 1/3. And I'm going to go ahead and change that denominator to 15 so we can have those fractions with the same denominator. How do I make 3 turn into 15? 3 times 5 equals 15. Well, what's 1 times 5? That's 5. Step 1, I found the multiple, 15. Step 2, I created equivalent fractions. So 3/15 is the same value as 1/5, and 5/15 is the same value as 1/3. Once I create those fractions that have the same denominator, it's much easier to do step 3 to compare. Is 5 pieces out of 15 larger, or is 3 pieces out of 15? Well, the bigger value here, or the larger amount, is definitely going to be 5 out of 15, or 1/3 is bigger than 1/5. So I theorize the answer is 1/5 is less than 1/3. It's reasonable because 1/3 has a greater value when you compare those like fractions. All right, independent practice. Let's go ahead and start with number 2. All right, well, I need to list the multiples of the numbers on the bottom of the denominators. And the multiples of 4 are 4, 8, 12. Again, I'm looking for the smallest one they share. I can go ahead and stop. I found the one they share. Okay, step 2 is to create those new fractions so that they have the same denominator. So 3/4 is going to have 8 as the new denominator. 7/8 will have 8 as the new denominator, or it will stay. Because I know 8 times 1 is 8. What's 7 times 1? Well, that's 7. So 7/8 is equivalent to 7/8. Makes sense. Okay, now 4 times 2 is 8. Well, what's 3 times 2? That equals 6. Okay, step 1, find the multiple. I got that. Step 2 is to create those equivalent fractions, right? We made new fractions so that they had the same denominator. Step 3 is where we get to look and compare. I can compare when they have the same denominator. Much easier. 6 pieces out of 8 or 7 pieces out of 8? Which one's bigger? Which one's larger? Well, if it was a huge cake and I had 7 pieces, this is the bigger value. So 7/8 is greater than 3/4. It's reasonable because 6/8 or 6 pieces out of 8 is smaller than 7 pieces out of 8. All right, moving on to problem 4. Let's start with step 1. List the multiples of the denominator. Well, 3, 6, 9, 12. I already found the denominator, the lowest common multiple. I can move to step 2 where I make equivalent fractions. So 2/3 is going to have a new denominator of 12. That's why I did step 1. 7/12 will keep the 12 as the denominator. And I know 12 times 1 is 12, and I have to do the same to the top. 1 times 7 is 7. How do I make 3 turn into 12? 3 times 4 equals 12, and 2 times 4 is 8. Step 1, look for that lowest common multiple, 12. Step 2 is to make those equivalent fractions. So 2/3 is the same as 8/12. 7/12 is the same as 7/12. So we can go ahead and compare. Is 8 pieces out of 12 or 7 pieces out of 12 larger? Well, again, if you have a big tray of brownies and you ate 8 out of the 12 pieces, you ate more than if you only had 7 pieces. So that means that 8/12 is bigger than 7/12. So 2/3 has a larger value. It makes sense. Hi, Bobcats, moving into problem solving. A recipe calls for 5/8 of brown sugar and 2/3 cup of flour. Which ingredient has the greater amount? So I'm going to take those denominators, right, because I need to find which one's greater. And I'm going to list the multiples. Step 1. 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, 24. Let's list the multiples of 8. 8, 16, 24. I found the lowest common multiple. It's 24. Step 2 is where I get to create those new fractions using my new denominator of 24. That's why I did step 1, to figure out what the new denominator was going to be. So how do I make 3 turn into 24? Well, I know 3 times 8 equals 24. What's 2 times 8? That's 16. I created an equivalent fraction. 2/3 is the same as 16/24. 8 times 3 is 24. 5 times 3 is 15. So again, I've created two fractions that are equal. They look nothing alike, like 25 pennies and a quarter, but they have the same value. Step 1, the multiple is 24. Step 2, create your fractions. Now step 3 is where I compare. Which one's bigger? Well, 16 out of 24 is larger than 15 out of 24. So 2/3 has the bigger value. So I know that 2/3 cup of flour is greater. I concluded the answer is flour is the ingredient you need more of. It's reasonable because 16 out of 24 is larger than 15 out of 24. A trail mix has a 1/2 cup of raisins and 2/3 cup of peanuts. Which ingredient has the greater amount? Well, step 1, let's list those multiples of the denominator. 2, 4, 6, 3, 6. I already found the least common multiple. Now that I know they both share 6, I can create a fraction that's equal to 1/2 using 6 as my denominator, and a fraction equal to 2/3 using 6. 3 times 2 equals 6. 2 times 2 equals 4. 2 times 3 is 6, and 1 times 3 is 3. So step 1, I got that multiple. Step 2, I created a fraction that's equal. 2/3 is equal to 4/6. 1/2 is the same as 3 parts out of 6. Okay, step 3 is where we compare. Is 3 out of 6 or 4 out of 6 bigger? Well, clearly 4 pieces out of 6 is bigger. So we already know which ingredient has the larger value. The 2/3 is bigger than the 1/2. So I determined the answer is the ingredient you need more of is peanuts. This is reasonable because 4 out of 6 is bigger than 3 out of 6. All right, Bobcats, what did you learn today? Well, in summary, I learned that sometimes 2 things can have the same value, can be worth the exact same amount, but look nothing alike. And when we are able to make them look alike, have that same denominator, it's easier to compare. It's easier to see which one's greater than, less than, or equal. So again, in summary today, I learned that you can make things look different as long as you keep the same value. And if a fraction has that same denominator, then you can compare easier. Thank you for your attention, Bobcats.